Woohoo! This has been kind of exciting and trying. I want to just tell you what's happening.
Oh, they do.
As you can see, fewer and fewer people are able to come, and
It's summer.
And it's summer. So this will be our last class, and when the frost comes in the fall, we'll come back and do something, whether it's American history or Emery County history or Utah history or European history. We'll get something going, but we're going to take a break for a while.
Yeah.
And that will help me in a number of ways. So I'm excited to be running for school board. So that's
Not as excited as some of us are.
well, I'm very excited. So and come to the parade in Orangeville on Saturday, and we've got the idea of a float. We hope it all comes together. But so I want everybody to please note that we're taking a break, but we'll be back. Okay, first thing I want to do is talk about what I did for my summer vacation.
First day assignment.
First day of summer, I went downtown looking for a job. Then I hung around the drugstore. Second day of summer vacation, I went downtown looking for a job and then hung around the drugstore. Third day of my summer vacation, I went downtown looking for a job, then hung around the drugstore. Fourth day of my summer vacation, I went down, I got a job, keeping kids from hanging out around the drugstore. I'd love to take credit for that. That's Cheech and Chong.
Yeah. I thought you were going to say, and then hung out at Tracy's.
Here's
My friends always hung out.
here's what I did on my trip. Thank you for being understanding about that. This is
Oh, it sounds
Gwen and I. This is our grandson, Carter Palastro. He graduated, and that's the Werner von Braun Center in Huntsville, Alabama. Huntsville is one of the centers for NASA, and this was named after Werner von Braun, who lived in Huntsville. So that's Carter.
That sounds like something from Young Frankenstein.
Slightly taller than I am, much cuter. It's okay. It was held at this big center. They hold events there and hockey games and basketball games and things. And that's him. When you marched in, they put your picture up on the Jumbotron. So that's kind of
That'd freak
nice
me out.
scene. And this is what it looked like. 436 graduates, and they were through in maybe an hour. And they had, that weekend, they had 6 graduations there for the different high schools in Huntsville.
Wow.
And that's me. And that is at Fort Donelson, which is on the Cumberland River. And the Cumberland River and the Tennessee River flow north together, and then Cumberland turns and becomes into the Tennessee. But there's a place called the Land Between the Rivers. And there were 2 forts there. The most important was Fort Donelson. And this is Ulysses S. Grant's first victory was here. And those were cannon, and they controlled that river. And they attacked by boat, and they attacked over land, and the South was winning. They were just smashing up with those cannons and the boats down on the river, and Grant's army was not making any headway on the land attack, and the Southern general panicked and thought they were losing and called for a retreat and lost the battle. So Grant's first victory.
So is Fort Donelson named after the Southern general or the
I don't believe it was named after either one. It was Fort Donelson before he was there. Okay, and then this is at Fort, just a ways back from Fort Donelson. Notice anything about the flags?
No, American.
They're all American flags. They did not allow any rebels to be buried there. And the rebels were, their bodies taken and dumped in a common grave. Really?
Wow.
Because then the North won.
Yeah.
So there you go. This is our littlest granddaughter. Julia. And Julia did not like me, can you tell?
I can tell.
Something about the face.
She did not like me at all. And my best shot was to hold her so she could see her mom and dad. And then she was this happy. She's 5 months old.
That's how Liza was with my
Yeah.
brother-in-law. Oh my
So if I turned around and looked at her, oh man, it was over. But she would be that happy if she could see me. And then we went to one of the most wonderful places. I thought it was Disneyland for adults. It's Buc-ee's. Buc-ee's. A convenience store like no other building will have 120 gas pumps. I don't know who
Holy cow.
Buc-ee was, but he's a beaver. And that's everywhere you go in there, everything is Buc-ee's brand. They buy other stuff, they put Buc-ee's stickers on it. Everything says Buc-ee's. And they sell, I bought 2 Hawaiian shirts from that place. I bought Gwen 2 swimming suits there. I mean, they sell everything at Buc-ee's, but it's a convenience store.
Are they price-wise comparable with Walmart, or?
No, they're much cheaper. I could not believe the prices. So
Well, and this stuff's kind of cheap.
the Hawaiian shirts were about $19 a piece, where most I'm spending about 30, 36. But no, and gasoline, $2.50 a gallon.
In what state?
Alabama.
What about the food?
Food was very inexpensive, and their specialty is a brisket sandwich. And they put out a bun, and then brisket about this high, and then a bun on top. I'm going, how do people eat that? So I didn't order that. But their big thing, and whenever they bring, they are roasting brisket all the time. They bring one out and begin to cut it and shred it, and all the people working there holler real loud, brisket's on, brisket's on. It's a kind of a crazy place, it's fun. So that was good. Then I went to the battles of Chattanooga and Chickamauga. What happened was General Rosecrans was told by Ulysses S. Grant, "You've got Chattanooga, just hang on to it till I bring the rest of the army up." But you think he listened to him? He did not. And so he attacked towards Georgia, crossed barely into the Georgia line, and met the South at Chickamauga Creek. And the South tore up Rosecrans and destroyed the Northern Army, and they retreated back to Chattanooga. And once they got into Chattanooga, the South surrounded them and was starving them out. And one of the places they were starving them out, you can see Chattanooga down there. This is called Lookout Mountain. And they were up on Lookout Mountain, and with their cannon on Lookout Mountain, they could hit anything down there, and they were just picking off the North piece by piece and starving them out. And when Ulysses S. Grant got up there, he came in on the Tennessee River, you see down there. He had some volunteers who came through, and they took one little foothold and then began shifting supplies there while they were under fire from Lookout Mountain. On the other side, I wonder if this shows the other side. No, on the other side, you can see it there, is Missionary Ridge. And when you had cannon on Lookout Mountain and Missionary Ridge, you controlled everything. But now they started getting food, and Ulysses S. Grant coordinated a really cool attack. His people attacked up Lookout Mountain, up Missionary Ridge, and then the soldiers that were surrounded, he got word to them, and they attacked Missionary Ridge too. And Grant wins. And one of the good things he did by winning is he fired Rosecrans and put a man in charge named General Thomas.
And could that cannon then hit that town?
He could hit any place in that town down there.
Wow.
That's a big cannon.
This was a place we went to another battle, the battle for Nashville, Tennessee. And it took there was a series of battles. The first one is where I'm at. in Franklin, Tennessee, just outside of Nashville. And this was a cemetery I came to, known to God, here rest the mortal remains of men, women, and children of Africa, enslaved in life, freed in death. And I want to show you the great care they took for the slaves. That's it. No names. Sometimes a rock and sometimes not.
A lot different than the
That was
other.
a slave cemetery. Now, if you look behind, that's a Confederate cemetery. And this is what a Confederate cemetery looks like. They were buried there, each with their name. Some they didn't know their names. And it said on there, known but to God, that kind of thing, or unknown soldier.
Pretty close quarters.
But they buried them in their units by state. And every year they put Confederate flags on them. So this was a Confederate cemetery.
Well,
Oh, sorry?
technically, the Confederates, weren't they still Americans?
Well, that became the big debate afterwards. Abraham Lincoln thought they were. But Congress said they're not.
What were they?
They said they were Confederate states.
They called themselves the Confederate States of America, and we declared them to be rebels. But I don't know. But the Confederates, this battle at Franklin was a bit of a draw, but the Confederates lose it because though it's a draw, the North gets away and heads towards Nashville to reinforce Nashville. And so they didn't destroy the army that they were hoping to. And so they follow along for a bigger battle at Nashville and lose horribly. But at this battle at Franklin, the man who put those headstones and buried their remains, he was the man who owned the property where the battle took place. And he went out after the battle and mounted up bodies and got some help, people to help him, and buried them and looked for identification and had a few people left over from the battle who were wounded or whatnot and stayed and helped him identify people. And so that's a private cemetery.
Yeah, well, that's pretty.
And it's maintained by that same family to this day. Then I went to Nashville to CrimeCon, a convention of podcasters of true crime podcasts.
Oh, my goodness.
And this was one, this lady on the left, she is a podcaster, and the lady in the middle is an IRS agent, but a gun-toting IRS agent.
Oh.
Yeah, and she's talking about her podcast, which is called Scamanda, which is joining two words, Amanda and scam.
Oh.
This Amanda scammed people out of over $10 million by claiming she had cancer and receiving
I
their
remember
charity.
that.
And
When was that?
what's that?
When was that?
It started in 2015
I remember this.
and continued on. Finally, nobody would listen to her. She's had this podcast, people are believing her, but the authorities wouldn't listen to her until she got this IRS agent to come in and say, did she pay taxes on all those donations she got? And really, the investigation took off there and found she did not have cancer. She ended up going to prison for 10 years. Her husband divorced her and took the kids. And there in prison, she had nothing else to do but write letters claiming she had cancer and asking people to send her money.
In prison.
In prison.
That also, she did it also in prison?
She never stopped. This is Chris Hansen on the left.
Oh.
You know who Chris Hansen is from To Catch a Predator, a TV show where they catch people who are trying to prey on children. And he is the moderator there. And he's talking about something, honestly, if I get on the school board, we're talking about this. It's people who use sexting to blackmail kids. And the man right in the middle, his son was being blackmailed and his son killed himself. And this couple, they were married, their son also was blackmailed and also killed himself. And they are now divorced, but they were all there to talk about their kids and how we need to change how we talk to kids about sexing. So that was a great one. We just went to those, this is this is pictured. Anybody know Dateline?
Sexing. I want to talk about sexing.
Okay, sexting, go ahead.
What does that mean to you? Because sexing means to me, you take the little chicken.
Not sexing,
But what are you saying then?
sexting.
With the T on it.
Texting sexual pictures.
Texting, oh.
What happened with both those two boys who killed themselves is some guy in West Africa, Nigeria or somewhere there, sent them pictures, pretended to be a girl, and sent naked pictures of her and said, send me some pictures of you. And so both these boys, 14 and 16, sent pictures, and then they said, now, send us money, or we're going to send these to everybody on your contact list, your grandparents, everybody. And they began trying, both of them tried to send them money, got to the point they had not enough money, and this lovely person in Nigeria or wherever said, well, if you can't send me the money, then just kill yourself. And they did. So,
Did they ever
And
catch
it's impossible to
those
call-
people never get caught.
it is so rare, yeah. They told us in that there were, in the whole time they've been doing this, they've caught 3 people, got them to the United States and put them on trial. 3 out of all this that's happening. So anyway, kids need to get this one message, and that is, if something happens to you like this, and you do something dumb, it's not the end of the world, and it can be fixed.
That's
It
exactly.
can be fixed. But there's a whole new element to it, and that's AI. They don't even have to get a picture of you. They create a picture of you and then threaten you with it. And kids just need to understand. It's not the end of the world. It can be fixed.
Yeah, it's part of the culture now.
So this is the Dateline NBC booth. I like Dateline NBC. That's Josh Mankiewicz, who's one of their major people. He was, I don't know if you said, he was very impressed with my Hawaiian shirt.
I'm sure.
And this is the guy from Eastern Arizona, Eastern Idaho News that was the pit bull that stuck with the Daybell fallow.
He finally come there.
And he's the one that flew to Hawaii and stuck a microphone in Lori Vallow's face and said, where's your kids? Lori, where's your kids? And stuck with it till the cops had to move. And
Where were her kids?
Dead.
Was she killed them?
She had a boyfriend killed her.
Somebody did.
her brother, her boyfriend, somebody, at her behest,
Go for
or her.
Oh, yeah.
her.
And on the
That's a
left
big-
is her sister, who testified against her in court,
So that's Lori's sister.
Lori's sister. And what she was talking about was her journey from believing Lori to realizing Lori was lying to her.
So could they not find the kids, and that's why they kept asking her, where are your kids, where are your
Oh, no,
kids?
they
couldn't
found him.
locate the kids, they couldn't locate them, finally, using
This is gonna be a
satellite
global story.
technology and others, they found where the kids were buried.
This
And the
just happened
boyfriend's
in
back there.
Idaho.
And that's me, and I bumped into the person who is in charge of KSL's podcasts,
Oh,
Cheryl Lake from Castledale.
I was gonna say, she looks just like a lake.
So I bumped into her and got to have, she and my daughter and my two of my grandkids.
Did you teach her?
Yeah.
I was gonna say, I bet,
I guess, my daughter has her debate coach and theater and.
I bet she got so excited.
Anyway, she's working on a new podcast. Do any of you know the podcast called Cold about Josh Powell and how he killed his wife and buried her somewhere
Oh,
and
yeah,
then ended up killing his kids and himself?
he burned them up in a
Well,
house.
that podcast called Cold She was the executive producer of it.
Look
And
that up.
she's getting a new one about a cult in Ogden, Utah, that will be coming out sometime in the future.
And so she's from here.
Castledale, Genevieve Lake's daughter, Keith and Genevieve's daughter. Yeah. Okay, let's see.
Wow.
Yeah, one more. Okay, cool. Well, since this is the last time we meet for a while, I wanted to talk about a special lesson. Now, we kind of got through the 60s. We've never gotten to the 70s, 80s, 90s, but I'm going to skip ahead. I'm going to skip to 9/11.
Yeah, that's good.
Okay, I think all of us here remember this. In fact, maybe you remember right where you were when you first heard about it.
I do.
I remember where I was. Glenn was right there with me.
I was going down the hill to school and stopping at my mother's, see if she was okay, so we went there and turned the TV on, and then saw the plane go into.
Saw the second plane hit. Yeah.
Yeah, Liza called me, because I never turn my TV on. I never would have made it to school if I had my TV on, but she called and said, Mom, there's been a terrible accident in New York. That's when just the first plane, she said, you better turn your TV on.
And that's what pretty much, because during World War II, a B-17 bomber hit the Empire State Building
Yeah,
as an accident. And people knowing a little bit about that history immediately jumped to, we've had an accident.
that's what Liza told
And
me.
while they were watching that, then here came the second plane, and suddenly the world turned 180 degrees. It's not an accident. We're under attack. So I want to talk about this a little bit tonight.
Yeah,
I want to tell you, that was in 2001. It's now 2024. Do you know that people, even who are 30 years old, do not remember this? We just think that everybody knows about this. But there is not a high school kid that was alive when this happened. There are very few college students who were alive when this happened.
Braden was about 3.
What's that, sorry?
I've never thought of it that way.
For this generation of kids coming up, it's like, for me, thinking about Pearl Harbor. Now, I was born in December of 57, Pearl Harbor happened December of 41. That's 16 years difference. Okay?
That's how fast
Now,
news becomes
wait.
history.
2001 is 23 years ago. In other words, my birthday was not nearly as far away as today is from when this happened. Time goes by fast. But this means, and this means a lot to us, but to kids today, it means very little. It was an event that happened. It was something we had to learn about in history.
And that's how fast,
If we got that far in the book, which
yeah,
we don't.
that's how fast today's news becomes tomorrow's history, is in 20 years.
It has little meaning to them. That's one thing that somewhat bothers me. That same day, besides 2 airplanes, one hitting each tower, an airplane hit the Pentagon. And as it came into the Pentagon, it turned so that it sliced deep into the Pentagon. Had it hit more just straight on, it may not have done the damage it did by turning right at the very end. And these airplanes were hijacked and had civilian passengers there. The hijackers, 19 of them, on 4 planes. One hijacker, I don't know if you know this, didn't show up. And he was caught later, and he is serving life in prison in some secret.
He didn't show up to work.
He didn't show up to the airport.
to
He
get on
chickened
the
out.
plane.
Oh, good.
Anyway, they killed the pilots, the co-pilots, and sometimes the flight attendants, and took the planes over. They had been in the United States for months learning how to fly, taking flying lessons. They didn't study much about landings and takeoffs because they weren't going to have to do those. Just how to fly the plane once you got control of it. And then also, United Flight 93, which took off from New Jersey and flew across Pennsylvania, turned and was headed back. When the passengers were able to get on phones and talk to people on the ground who told them what had happened.
Those were
Now,
some
the thing that happened here for this plane is,
brave.
it was late. It was delayed, and so it took off much later than the other planes did. So it was delayed, and by the time it turned around, the people on the ground were telling what happened. And they resolved to try to take the plane over and fly it if they could, and if they couldn't, to crash it. But can you tell by the angle where it's headed to?
Washington DC.
Washington, D.C. We don't know if its intended target was the Capitol or the White House, but it was headed back to Washington, D.C. And they tried to take over the plane. The last thing we hear on the radio is screaming and hollering, and then it crashed into a field in Pennsylvania, and this is the crash site.
I wonder why they went so far west before they turned back.
I don't know. I don't know if something went wrong and it took them longer to take over the cockpit, or what had happened. I don't know that.
I can't remember, Neil, where'd the other two planes take off from?
Boston.
Two took off from Boston,
Okay,
and one took off from New York, and one took off from New Jersey. Was it New York or Washington, D.C.?
I went there
There
a
were
couple
four
of
planes.
years ago, and they have a really nice memorial
It
in
is.
the visitor center.
oh, in the field, here in Pennsylvania too? Oh, yeah, I've been to the memorial in,
But
New
here's the
York.
timeline of what
it's
happened.
just terrible.
So you can see that the first plane takes off at about 8 o'clock. And as it continues, you can see that Flight 11 hit the North Tower. That's, sorry, Flight 11 hit the North Tower, and it hit it kind of high. That wasn't their intention. They wanted the lower the better.
Yeah,
And it hit between floors 93 and 99. And then 20 minutes later, the Flight 175 hit the South Tower. Yeah, the South Tower between floors 77 and 85.
that was,
And they're coming down. Then, 34 minutes later, Flight 77 hits the west side of the Pentagon. And the Pentagon, obviously a military target, but it killed more civilians than it killed military when it hit civilian employees. And the Pentagon's an obvious target because it's so easy to spot from the air. It's so big and its shape made it an easy target. And then less than half an hour later, Flight 93 crashes in a field in Pennsylvania. Okay. Then at about almost 10 o'clock, so the South Tower is hit second, it's hit at 9, and at 10 it collapses. So it's up for 1 hour after it's hit. The North Tower, 8:46 it's hit, and it goes down almost at 10:30, and it collapses. So it stayed up longer, and the reason is simple. It got hit higher, and the South Tower got hit lower, so it came down faster. About an hour for that, and about an hour and 45 minutes for the North Tower. Something interesting, there were 3 towers that came down in the World Trade Center complex. Parts from these towers, fiery burning garbage fell on Tower 7, which is a much shorter tower down here, and caught it on fire, and it collapsed too. But no one was killed there. It was fully abandoned by that time. Okay. Other buildings were hurt or damaged. A Marriott hotel was destroyed. Okay. Okay.
Neil, it's kind of like a tornado, because when we were there, we were reading, and there's a little Greek Orthodox church on the same block. The little rounded thing on the top of that one building reminded me of that. A little church on the same block that wasn't even damaged at all. It was just really an awful kind of hit and miss. And the debris, we can all remember the people running down the streets ahead of the dirt and the sand.
Well,
It's,
an interesting thing, South Tower was hit lower, North Tower hit higher. More people died in the North Tower than died in the South Tower.
that's because they had all the rescue people up there by then. Do you think?
No,
Oh,
I'll tell you why in a minute. Here's the death toll. They believe 2,977 died. And they really give a higher number than that. 296. 2,996. But I didn't want to put the terrorists up here.
I don't think they count.
So, other than terrorists, there were two, because some of them are counted in with others, but at the World Trade Center, 2,603 people died. Okay, 2,603. At the Pentagon, 125 died. 55 of them were military personnel, and the rest were civilian employees.
At the Pentagon, oh my goodness.
343 fire department people died. 71 law enforcement. 92 Americans on 92 people on American Airlines 11 that hit the North Tower died. 65 on United 175 that hit the South Tower. 64 on American Airlines 77 that hit the Pentagon. And 44 on United Airlines 93.
Well, none of the planes were clear full. I didn't realize that.
Let me ask you this question. Every one of these flights was headed to California. Why? Why did why did they pick flights headed to California? Tell them, Tom.
They loaded more fuel than
They picked them because they had a lot of fuel.
Oh, so see, this was an attack of some sort,
It was.
but there was no war started.
It was the same reason Hamas did October 7th.
I'm still wondering about that one.
Yeah,
Why did they attack us? What had we ever done to them?
In a supreme power.
imperialism.
and
So,
alive.
so Julie says, you want to punch the biggest guy in the nose.
And they knew they could do this when they knew they couldn't do it couldn't get away with some of the other things.
Okay. Well, this was, as Cheryl pointed out, a very complex attack. It had actually been planned for years. It was highly financed. It was so carefully planned and still had its problems.
Well, I
But how had we ever hurt them?
I know there are more conspiracy theories about 9/11 than there even are about John F. Kennedy's assassination. And
You think,
I would
do you
really
think they
like
were
to-
mad that we walked on the moon or didn't? I don't know.
I would like an answer to your question that makes sense to me.
Would they have any of them ever said they attacked us?
No,
You don't
they
think?
did.
You're saying?
Oh, I don't mean them.
Oh, the powers that be.
I mean Osama bin Laden. He's the man who put this into effect. He was the money man. He paid for it. He helped plan it.
Well, he doesn't like us.
What's not to like?
Well, actually,
Do you know that there were people who died that were from over 100 different countries that day? Wasn't we?
In the World
How-
Trade Center.
There were dozens and dozens of Muslims who died that day.
maybe he was seeking attention.
Well, he got it. Eventually, a bullet in his face. But I don't know that what good does attention do him?
Well, and they,
Power ideas.
and then US, I mean, not that Saddam Hussein was a saint or anything. He was a terrible, terrible man. But they got the wrong guy that was responsible for this particular, I mean, he was bad.
Well,
He,
you were all there, not like young kids.
no,
You know darn well that George W. Bush was going after,
he needed an
he was going after Osama bin Laden. He said, well, I might as well finish what my father started.
yeah.
And went into Iraq under very weak evidence.
I
They
think,
had pictures they showed in the UN with Colin Powell.
Yep. Weak.
Oh, it was.
Do you remember all the weapons of mass destruction they discovered in Iraq?
they thought they were going
Found an empty
to,
I
barrel.
thought that was a joke.
but they needed an enemy right then. They really did. Something like that happens to you, at least with Pearl Harbor, they knew who did it.
Okay, let's go back to the question though. Why did they do this?
It had to be ideological, some.
The great Satan.
Well, okay. Hey, guess what I have here?
The why, I don't.
On September 11th, 2000, he's telling us what happened.
I can remember watching it, can't remember.
These acts of mass murder were intended to frighten our nation into chaos and retreat, but they have failed. Our country is strong. A great people has been moved to defend a great nation. Terrorist attacks can shake the foundations of our biggest buildings, but they cannot touch the foundation of America. These acts shatter steel, but they cannot dent the steel of American resolve. America was targeted for attack because... Go ahead. Because we're the brightest beacon for freedom and opportunity in the world. And no one will keep that light from shining. Today our nation saw evil and the very worst of human nature, and we responded with the best of America, with the daring of our rescue workers, with the caring for strangers and neighbors who came to give blood and help in any way they could. Our financial institutions remain strong. We will take every precaution to protect our citizens. He says we were attacked because we were good.
That's kind of what Julie said.
I remember, so,
It is what Judy said. What do you think? Is he right? Is George W. Bush right on this one?
I think so. I think that's why I remember thinking that they attacked us because we were the supreme,
That's what he called us, a shining light.
a shining light, yeah.
And I was sitting there with sixth graders trying to come up with an answer. It was,
I wish we could ask Osama bin Laden why he did such a thing. So that's why I have this right here.
mhm.
Do you know he issued 2 declarations on this?
He did?
He did,
Where are they?
in my hand.
Oh.
2 times before the attacks. The first one was in August of '96, so about 5 years before the attack.
That when Bill Clinton had a chance to take him out?
That's when Bill Clinton had a chance to take him out. And didn't.
Did.
He issued a fatwa. A fatwa is a declaration and reason for war. Would you like to hear what he had to say? It was 30 pages.
Summarize.
Yeah.
Summarize? Okay,
Yeah.
I can right here. Here's the title, and that gives you a hint. Declaration of war against the Americans occupying the land of the two holy places,
Medina and Mecca?
Mecca and Medina.
Lord occupying them.
The central premise of this fatwa is that the people of Islam had suffered from aggression, iniquity, and injustice imposed upon them by the Zionist Crusader Alliance and their collaborators. It is no longer possible to be quiet, he said. It is not acceptable to give a blind eye to the matter. There is no more important duty than punishing the American enemy out of our Holy Land. And he calls on his Muslim brothers to concentrate on destroying, fighting, and killing the enemy until by the grace of Allah, it is completely defeated. He warned other jihadists that due to the imbalance of power between our armed forces and the enemy forces, a suitable means of fighting must be adopted. That is, using fast-moving light forces that work under complete secrecy. At the end, he urged Muslim brothers to take part in fighting against the enemy, your enemy and their enemy, the Americans and the Israelis.
They were heroes because they did that.
Next, second fatwa. This was issued 2 years later in '98, just 3 years before the attack.
So he's all but saying,
And
this is coming.
He just issued the first one by himself. He issued this and had several people, most of whom are no longer alive, sign up with him. Go ahead.
Was the public, us, aware of the rules? I don't remember the rules. Before, prior to.
He didn't make a secret of them.
Okay, so.
I don't know how well the news covered it.
But did we make a secret? of
Yeah,
it?
Well, I don't know if we thought it was that important.
Yeah, who cares what this guy thinks?
This is another.
Okay, Julie.
who did he issue it to?
To the Islamic world, to the entire world of Islam, including Islamic Americans.
So you-
3 facts are known to everyone, it says, that compel war against the United States. First, the United States has been occupying the lands of Islam and its holiest places. Hold on. Second, the Crusader Zionist Alliance has inflicted great devastation upon the Iraqi people. And third, the United States' goal is to serve the Jews' petty state and divert attention from its occupation of Jerusalem and murder of Muslims there.
All the religious views.
His big thing is we had taken over the Holy Land. To them, the Holy Land is Mecca and Medina, which are in
Saudi Arabia.
Saudi Arabia. When did we ever do that?
Did we have troops over there?
Did we have troops over there?
I mean, were there
When
bases?
we went to war,
Well, yeah,
originally, George H.W. Bush against Iraq. Remember how Iraq had
Took over Kuwait.
invaded Kuwait and we responded to get Kuwait back?
yeah.
We put ammunition, weapons, storage in Saudi Arabia, nowhere near Mecca and Medina, the other side of the
That's,
country.
yeah.
The other side of the country, to use so that we didn't have to transport so much into Kuwait, that we could launch from there as we needed to. That's what he's talking about.
So there's
Saudi
no
Arabia.
soldiers in Mecca and Medina.
We never took over Mecca and Medina. We didn't even try. We knew what that would do. All we needed was a place to store weapons that we might need to use in that first Gulf War.
And Saudi Arabia invited us in.
Oh, and helped us.
Right.
Saudi Arabia knew who was next after Kuwait, and it was them.
So really what it boils down to, the question of why, is punishment. That's the key.
In his mind, it's punishing us for violating his religion. And now that brings something up that I think it was Julie said. These terrorists look like heroes to Osama bin Laden and his kind of people, Al-Qaeda, the Taliban, others. Well, help me out. There's this old saying, one man's freedom fighter is another man's terrorist. Were they wrong, evil terrorists, or just confused, overly religious freedom fighters?
It's certainly were the left. They're a mess. Yeah.
I know they believe they were in the right,
Yeah.
and we believe they're in the wrong. Is there any subjective way to determine who's right and wrong on this?
Well, you can compare it to what's going on college campuses right now
I
between
don't
the
want to.
Palestinians
I don't want to.
and
I
the
want to
Jews.
look. I want to look out and say, is there a subjective way to tell right from wrong here?
Where's the facts? Where's the truth?
Yeah.
Well,
I-
where is the truth?
We didn't take over their holy land.
But we put weapons in a holy place.
So
It's kind of, has some.
it's not a holy place, it's Saudi Arabia.
It's a
Huge
rich,
country.
it's a
But
rich
to
place.
them-
Their government's request.
To
Help
them,
them.
it's a holy place. And you know
All of Saudi
that had
Arabia.
Saddam Hussein taken Kuwait successfully, Saudi Arabia was next.
Yeah.
The government of Saudi Arabia has never been loved by the Muslims that much. We did put the weapons there. So were we in the wrong a little bit?
No.
It's kind of a parallel between that and the Native American situation when we came west. Were we wrong? Well,
That's a great debate, but I think there's a way to resolve this one. I think there's a way to resolve this one. The fatwa is a declaration of war, and he refers to his followers as soldiers.
Yes. He gave us two
Hold
different
on.
warnings.
Who do soldiers fight?
Soldiers.
He-
Soldiers.
Yeah.
Do they kill innocent men, women, and children?
Yes, they do, but they're not supposed to.
No, do they?
No.
Who kills innocent men, women, and children?
Terrorists.
Terrorists, the bad guys.
War does.
Well, war can, but and mostly that happens by accident because something's in the way. But that wasn't the case here. There was one military target they were targeting. The rest were civilians.
Well, in the World Trade Center, like you said, how many different nationalities were represented in that building?
Now, when we invaded Afghanistan, were we targeting civilians? Did civilians die? Of course they did. Were we targeting civilians? No. No. How do you know who the good guys are and who the bad guys are? And the answer is, bad guys target civilians, men, women, children, for the purpose of breeding fear.
And Native Americans.
And
We can't get
Native
away from
Americans.
it. We are not that good.
Well,
We are not.
We're getting better.
I understand, but I'm not going back to 1883.
Yeah.
What I'm saying is 2001, were we the bad guys in this thing?
No, I
And
don't
the answer
think
is
so.
there can be no way we can be called the bad guys.
No.
was he, by attacking the World Trade Center, was he attacking the West?
He was attacking the West and its financial institutions.
So the United States was the only enemy.
No.
Was it the
Any nation that could be considered somewhat Christian was probably under attack.
Any friend of Israel, basically.
Or any friend of Israel.
Well, it's, no.
And isn't it interesting, how many weapons did Israel put in Saudi Arabia?
A lot.
Zero.
Oh, that-
Zero. This is an attack of hatred and not against our soldiers.
That is good, because Pearl Harbor, it was a military attack on a
Mostly
military.
until they started bombing the hospital.
Well, yeah, but I mean, they weren't just blowing up the islands all to pieces
Yet.
yet. Well, war
Okay.
turns ugly pretty easy, I know.
Does anybody know what happened at Dunkirk in World War II? The British Army and a large part of the French Army were surrounded by the Germans, and Hitler said, we'll just use them for target practice. And he turned most of the army towards Paris to take Paris. And the rest of the army Hitler left back there proceeds to just try to blow up these trapped men. And ships and boats and every kind of boat you can think of came over. In a week, 300,000 men and got them off of there. Do you know what happened at 9/11 that day? As those buildings were on fire and then collapsing, this massive cloud of smoke and dust and debris bubbles up, and people fled for their lives. And Manhattan is an island. And they ran to the bottom of the island and they were trapped. And some of the tour boats and others said, let's go pick people up. And they radioed the Coast Guard and said, we're headed in to grab people. And the Coast Guard said, great idea, and sent out the call. Anybody who has a boat, go pick up people off the bottom of Manhattan. And that's what happened.
Yeah, that Wrecker Park down there, I think that's what it's called. That's as far as you can go.
And they were picking those people up, loading up their boats, and hauling them to safety. Some they were taking clear up to New Jersey and dumping them off. And they were trying, nobody organized it. Just people showed up. If you look, you'll see a tugboat. And then there were some tour boats. In 9 hours, they took 500,000 people safely off.
Manhattan.
It's the biggest boat lift in the history of the world, far bigger than Dunkirk, and far faster.
And see, that's,
9 hours.
President Bush did talk about how it brought out the best in people for a little while.
Nobody had to organize it.
For a little while.
The Coast Guard was basically, hey, slow down, we're in charge here. But what they really did, the Coast Guard, is send out a call to anybody, come and help us. And they did. And some of them made 4 or 5 trips coming and gathering up people. There was a lady in a wheelchair, and she couldn't get aboard the boat. And so 4 men came and picked up the wheelchair and carried it up there. And none of them got on that boat yet. And they handed her up to people who took her and put her on the boat and got her to safety. I'm not sure if those were Democrats or Republicans. Because that day it didn't matter a bit. Not one bit.
It's too bad it takes something like that, isn't it?
Well, the last story I'm going to tell you is about a man that you need to know about. And lots of people don't know about it. His name was Cyril Richard Rescorla. He was born in the southern part of England. And as he grew up, he and what he saw were American soldiers marching down his streets. They were getting ready for D-Day. As a young man, he sees them getting ready for D-Day. And he loved Americans so much that he dropped the Cyril part of his name because it sounded too British. So he was Cyril Richard Rescorla. He became Rick Rescorla and insisted people call him Rick because he thought that sounded American. And he grew up wanting to be an American soldier. He loved Americans. And that's his first memories and remembrances were American soldiers getting ready for D-Day. This will fight. And they get to be close friends. And Dan says to him, Rick, you're our army. And Rick says, I know, but I thought maybe this was the way to get to the American army. And so it was the late 50s, early part of the 60s, and Dan talks to Rick and stay friends, and he says to Rick, you need to join the American army. And so, Rick, he joined the American army in time to fight in Vietnam. He was made a second lieutenant because of his fighting experience he'd had in Africa. Plus they needed second lieutenants pretty bad because they got killed right and left. He was placed in charge of a unit of men. This is a picture, the top is a picture of Rick in his first battle in Vietnam. And I talked to you about this battle when we talked about Vietnam. It was the Battle of the Ia Drang Valley. The first battle where we dropped people off using helicopters. And Rick was in that battle. And they dropped him and his men off. And if you remember, they thought there were a couple hundred Vietnamese, and it turned out there were over 4,000. And they were surrounded, and they made this circle, and they were holding the Vietnamese off so airplanes could land and bring in more men and take the wounded out. And it was some of the worst fighting ever. And Rick's men had a part of the line, and he got there, and he knew how to fight in jungles. He got up there and said, lay down. Lay down and stay low. And they were attacked over and over and over again. And they come to a point where they're almost ready to break. And Rick does the stupidest thing you've ever seen. He stood up and he began to sing a song that he had learned back in Cornwall, England, his hometown. And it's to a song called Men of Harlech, but he sang it, Men of Cornwall. Men of Cornwall, stop your dreaming. Can't you see their spear points gleaming? See the warriors' pennant streaming to this battlefield. Men of Cornwall, stand ye steady. It cannot be ever said, ye for the battle were not ready. Stand and never yield. And he sang in this big baritone voice. He sang, and his men held. And Colonel Hal Moore, who was the man who was in charge of that operation and was on the ground there, said, I have never commanded a fire soldier than Rick Rescorla. And when he wrote his book called We Were Soldiers and Young, which became a movie, We Were Soldiers, he put this picture on the cover of his first edition of his book, a picture of Rick Rescorla there. Now, he served 2 tours. During those 2 tours, it's estimated that he commanded maybe at least 100 men and maybe as many as 200. He was different than most of the other second lieutenants. Lots of them didn't want to get to know their men very well because they weren't going to be around very long. They didn't even know their names very well oftentimes until they'd been out there for quite a while. That wasn't Rick. He wanted to know their names. He wanted to know where they were from. He knew the names of their wives, their girlfriends. If any of them had kids, he knew the names of their kids. He knew everything about them, and he just loved his men. And it's not unusual when you're in as much fighting as Rick's unit was to lose half your men in a year. He was there 2 years, and he lost 6 men. 6. Now that's a strange number, isn't it?
You certainly
He
want
knew
him
their
as your
names,
commander.
he knew their family, and they hurt. Well, after 2 tours in Vietnam, he comes home to a country he hadn't been to before. the United States of America. And he gets his greatest gift. He's made an American citizen. And he always said that was the greatest gift I ever got. He took the GI Bill and he went to school, college, got a degree in English. He said it was easy, he already knew the language. He
Thought he
then
did.
got a master's degree in English literature, and then he got a PhD, oddly enough he switched, in criminology. And he got his PhD in criminology and he became a professor. He married and divorced, and one day while he was a professor, he went to the park to jog. He jogged every day, barefoot. And there was a lady there jogging too, and she saw him and made fun of him. Can't afford shoes, stuff like that. And he stopped and said, I learned to run barefoot in Africa. And she said, what are you talking about? And a few months later, they were married. And that was the love of his life. As time went on, he enjoyed being a college professor, but it's kind of a sedentary life. Who should show up? This, by the way, he stayed in the reserves. This is Rick on the left in his uniform as a reservist. You can see he's getting older. Dan Hill, at about the same time, Dan Hill had gone on to become a security consultant for big companies. And Dan Hill showed up and said to Rick, I just got this huge contract and I can't take it because I have too many other contracts. Morgan Stanley is looking for a security consultant for their property. They own 22 floors in the World Trade Center. We need you to come and be their security consultant. He talked over his wife and they decided, okay. They moved to New Jersey. He went to work in Manhattan as a security consultant for Morgan Stanley, who had become Morgan Stanley Dean Witter, ultimately. The biggest financial institution in the United States at that time. Okay? And he found them as frustrating as ever. He went and he went to his company and said, this is a bad place for security. He said, I've been down in the basement, and you could drive a truck filled with explosives down there, detonate it, and bring one of these buildings down. And his company said, well, don't tell us, go tell the security people for the World Trade Center. So he did, and they laughed at him. February 26, 1993. Some Islamic terrorists in New York City drove a truck very similar to what Timothy McVeigh had. Drove a truck filled with homemade explosive down into the basement. The men who drove it down set the fuse, got out, walked away, and when it blew up, that's the kind of damage it did in the basement. It didn't bring the building down, but it devastated the basement. It killed 6 people and injured more than 1,000. Now that number is kind of weird, but I'll explain why in a minute. Suddenly, Rick is the smartest man in the building. He predicted this. And so now the security consultants came to him and he got a hold of Dan. And by the way, they caught those terrorists. You remember one was a blind cleric, a blind Muslim cleric. Do you know the man who blew the case open and got the police there to make the arrest? It was Dan Hill. He's the one who figured it out and got him there. Well, Dan and Rick get together and they look at the situation and they both come up with the same thing. The next attack's coming from the air. Now, they did not think it was airplanes. It's not what they were thinking. They thought of a ship that would sail in and get close to the island and launch missiles. And so they were very concerned. So Rick goes to his bosses at Morgan Stanley Dean Witter and says, I have found some property in New Jersey. It's only 4 and a couple places 5 stories high. It's spread out, but it's covered by trees. There's trees everywhere. It's very hard to see from the air. You can't hit it from the ocean. And it's cheaper than what you're paying right now at the World Trade Center. Break your contract, let's go. And they said, oh, we have till 2006. And he said, it's not safe. I can't protect you here. Let's go. And it's available and it's cheaper. And the smartest money people in the world said, no, I don't think we better. So he said, good, I quit then. And they said, what's it going to take to keep you here? And he said, there are some conditions. I want fire drills. Okay. They didn't have any idea what he meant as fire drills. And he said, those 1,000 people that were injured mostly were trampled by other people. The explosion didn't injure them. Other people trying to get out of the building injured them. And it's because every stairwell filled with smoke. I want emergency lighting that comes on. If for any reason the power is interrupted, this emergency lighting comes on. Or if there's an emergency, the emergency lighting comes on. And I want fans that suck smoke out of stairwells. And Morgan Stanley Dean Witter said, okay, and they paid for it for the tower they were in. So here they're older, you can see. Richter square on the bottom, Dan Hill on the top. And this is Rick. He's putting on a little weight. He began to hold his drills, and his company hated him. Morgan Stanley hated him because what he meant by drills is, we announce that we're having a drill, you get up from your desk and you take any clients or anybody who's by you, and you take them with you, and that's your stairwell, and you go to that stairwell and you go down, and when you come out, here's where you rally at. You go to this building and that's where you get together and then start counting who's there. And every time he did one of these, it shut down their whole company for a day. So they finally negotiated, he wanted them every month. They negotiated and got them every 3 months. They got a drill. And then he did an interesting thing. He would call for the drill, and then he would stand up and grab that megaphone. And he would go down from floor to floor, going down the different stairwells, and in a booming voice, he would announce, come on, let's go, let's be moving, let's make this work. And they got to know his voice. They really got to know his voice. He also hired around-the-clock shifts of security people on the floors. And those security people were to get people in the stairwells down during these drills. And they could clear out, they had from the 55th to the 77th floor. 22 floors, and they could clear that out. They were not allowed to take the elevators. You walked out. People hated it. His bosses hated it.
That's a lot of flights of stairs.
But you can see behind him the emergency lights and the fans that would come on. Now, on 9/11, on the right is the North Tower that's hit first. And as it hits, everybody thinks the same thing except Rick. As it hits, everybody thinks a horrible accident. And Rick doesn't think that. And as it hit, a voice comes over an intercom on the South Tower of all the floors that said, we've had an accident in the North Tower, everybody's safe, there's no problem, stay at your desks. Just stay where you're at. We don't want things to pile up at the bottom as we're evacuating people. Just sit still. And then they heard the other voice. It was Rick. He set up the alarm and he said, let's move. And he was coming down floor to floor announcing, let's get out of here. His office was on the top, the 77th floor. Do you remember where that second plane hit? The 77th through the 85th floors. If he hadn't stood up and started moving people, he would have been killed. But he got them moving, and they were going, and they knew what to do. He taught them, you don't go alone. You take any clients that are there, any visitors, and you show them how to get out. And he gets them going down, and as they get going down, do you remember what happens 20 minutes later? They're not out of the building yet, but they're quite a ways down. The South Tower is hit, and they all feel it. And the lights go out, and smoke starts to fill the stairwells, and suddenly the smoke is sucked out, and the lights come on. But people are still panicking.
Yeah.
And Rick goes down a few floors on one stairwell, then he goes across and gets people down from there, down the next stairwell, and he's going back and forth. And he's saying something to them. Don't run, don't push, you're Americans. Americans don't hurt other Americans. Help each other. And when it started to get real bad, he started singing. He started singing. Men of Cornwall, stop your bleeding. Can't you see their spearpoints gleaming? See their warriors pennant streaming to this battlefield. Men of Cornwall, stand ye steady. It cannot be ever said, ye for the battle, we're not ready. Stand and never yield. And they heard him singing. They didn't push, they didn't shove, they just did what they had been trained. And they got out. And he got down to the 10th floor. And he ran into his boss, a vice president over security. And he said to his boss, do you think you can get these people out the rest of the way? And he said, sure, we know what we're doing, we're trained. What are you doing? Rick said, I have to go back and see if there's anybody who got left. So the vice president kept clearing the floors like Rick had been doing, and they got people out. Rick turned and walked back up the stairs. 18 minutes later, that happened. Rick's body crushed to powder. He was never found. Now, that number 6 was kind of crazy, wasn't it? Remember, in Vietnam, he lost 6 soldiers. And in that first explosion, when they wouldn't listen to him, 6 people died. Of the Morgan, now you understand it, he got more people out. Of the Morgan Stanley, Dean Witter people, that day, 6 died. That's it. They know that Rick saved over 2,700 people himself. That's 100 more people than died that day at the Twin Towers. Himself saved. One of the 6 was Rick himself. And there's a memorial for him in New Jersey. There's also one in Cornwall, England. And at the memorial service, his wife spoke, and she said, Rick had gotten everybody out that could get out. He knew that. She said, he wasn't going back for anybody else. He'd always said, I'm never coming home again. I'm losing people. He was going back for those men he left in Vietnam. This is an entirely true story. There are books written about it. You can look him up. R-I-C-K, Rescorla is R-E-S-C-O-R-L-A. There is a documentary about it from the History Channel that I bought a copy. You can study about Rick Rescorla and learn a lot more than what I told you tonight.
We needed to, I was teaching at this time, we needed stories like this. We really did. We didn't have any answers, and my kids had so many questions. Well, the big one was just like you said, why do they hate, that was their question, why do they hate us so much?
Well, I'm gonna teach this on Friday to some people who don't remember 9/11. Because they need to know this story, and they need to know the story of the boat lift, and the story of 343 firemen who go into a building, watch one come down, go into the other, and still are trying.
I didn't know the boat thing at all.
Well,
Oh, yeah.
hey, thanks for letting me teach you for the last couple of years. We'll hope to see you in the fall, but
So,
have a good summer.
there's so much to learn. I'm sure you'll find something to,
Yes.
The graduation ceremony or anything?
Yes, do you guys remember that when you're each supposed to bring me, no.
almost brought the treat tonight, but.
No, just thank you. And when we start up in the fall, maybe we'll get more people who want to come or whatever, so. And thanks to Castledale City, we really do appreciate you letting us come over here.
I could just let you come, but you know the story.
I know, and that's fine. We appreciate you being here and helping us out. And,
Glad to be here. As I sit here though,
Okay.
and I think how united the country was after 9/11, don't you wonder what it's gonna take to pull our country back together again, because we are nowhere near where we were then.
I know I have a note in my scriptures
That's
about,
my heart, is like, I feel right now, I feel like, what would it take to make us as united as we were back then?
well, I'm gonna say, we were somewhat divided, but not like we are today.
oh no,
Oh,
no.
here,
We had an interesting election the year before this, if you remember. George W. Bush and Al Gore essentially tied,
Yeah.
and it was decided by the governor of Florida, who he was George W. Bush's brother. And then it went to the Supreme Court, who made the final decision, and it still took place without violence,
And nobody,
without protests,
there was no.
without anger. So we were divided, but we were not divided like we are today. I agree with you, Julie. I don't know what it would take. I don't know what it would take.
I'm afraid where you just saw these terrorists arrested from Tajikistan,
Yeah,
you know, I think we've got another 9/11 coming.
I think we have been infiltrated by many, many terrorists.
Oh, yeah. Even
Yeah,
I
I'm glad they
heard about
were
sweepers.
watching those from Tajikistan. But for every one you watch, how many can you not watch? So, I
Yeah,
don't
we
know.
got them in Congress.
Yeah.
Well, before before I say anything that will ruin my chances of being elected myself.
Well, you've got my vote.
Do I just push the X?
Yeah, let me see, I can probably turn off. Hey, thanks for listening in. Let's see here. No, this X.
Now you can say-
Stop streaming.